You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Garrett Shields. Now, Garrett, tell me a little bit about what you do professionally.
Well, professionally, I'm just like a server slash bartender. But right now, I am trying to just do a podcast about history subjects that I find interesting, fascinating. Um, I used to not be very interested in history when I was younger, but just as I kind of learned, that was kind of like the result of like high school teachers or something.
Yes,
Um,
starting to do a little bit more like research about you, not stalking you in any way, but kind of doing, checking out your page and everything. So I'm guessing you just started or not too
yeah,
long ago.
yeah. I've had stuff where I've been working on it because it does take a lot of research and
Especially with your topic, first of all, you're talking about history. Now, we're not talking about the history, the one that's read to us in schools by the wonderful teachers that teach, but no, we're talking about the untold history.
right. Um, I mean, most of it is untold or just kind of gets swept under the rug or passed over because I mean, of course, there is so much that has to get taught, but I mean, with the way some schools are, at least here in Oklahoma, there some of the teachers, or I guess most of them are coaches, so they don't really even you know give that much of an enthusiasm for history. But a lot of it is definitely like I just right now just find books on the shelves at like half price books or something, or uh, at the library, and if it sparks.
I got a book right in front of me. It says what you don't know. There's a weird side to every story. And I actually got this at a thrift store. It's actually I got my another book here too, just in case we thought about talking about it. Greatest American Conspiracies. It's got every single conspiracy basically from the start, all in this giant book. And I just picked it up for 25 cents. You find some weird things at like a thrift store or something. So where did you get your fascination with just history in general? It's a weird subject for a lot of kids to try and get into.
Right. Especially most people have no fascination whatever. My dad would watch History Channel back when it was in its heyday of like World War II documentaries and actually getting history, or at least telling stories and all that kind of
Now it's about aliens and things of that
yeah,
sort.
ancient aliens or ice road truckers or something like that. Yeah. So I mean, I don't really have TV, so I don't pay attention to what's going on and all of that. But I mean, I still see a documentary here and there and everything. But when it comes to just the whole history, like here are the facts, and I do like want to hear a story out of them because there are great stories, even if it's just like listing the facts and everything like that.
Well, what types of things have you learned through your research and starting to read a little bit, guess more books? Because everyone I think knows the story about Christopher Columbus, but they also know that it's not as true as we read in the history books when it comes to that he used to bash babies on rocks. He basically
Right.
did this journey and then lied about saying they found a bunch of gold and there was gold there just so they can bring more ships so he would have a safe passage home because they would leave him there if he didn't find what he was looking for. And everyone chalks him up to discovering that the earth is circular. I always thought it was Magellan, that guy. Usually like when my buddy misses directions or something, we get lost somewhere, I'm like, good job, Magellan. But
Right. I mean, I it's a weird confusion because I mean, I was more of like, especially going through college. Um, I had a history of science course, and there was just a lot of these, things that they brought up that was just kind of like, okay, that's weird. Like, why even teach that a certain way in high school? Like, I mean, that was kind of one of the points on my first episode about the whole Christopher Columbus. Like most people now, because we have social media, Facebook, Instagram, like it's it's slightly common knowledge to where, oh, what you were taught in high school or in elementary school was not real. Um, Lost my train of thought there for a second. But going back to that, where like learning, oh, like Magellan and everything like that, like I thought I knew he was kind of like the one that mapped the world, but it was just it never occurred to me that like it was obvious like people like Aristotle or the ancient Greeks or Romans, they had like murals or they had statues that had round earth, and it just never like clicked with you whenever your kid taught like, oh, Christopher Columbus, they made fun of him because he would fall off the earth.
The sad thing
And
about history that gets a lot of stuff wrong is the fact that history is written by the winner, so it doesn't give all the
right,
crucial information you really need to know. I started finding this out when I watched a podcast with Joe Rogan about Alex Jones, and he exposed a bunch of government conspiracy theories. And I said, how much do I really not know? And a lot of my information comes from experiences, talking to people like yourself, talking just to average
yeah.
day people, having conversations, but also doing my own research with specific topics and specific things throughout history. Have you found anything about history through your readings that you find very, very, very fascinating?
I like the parallels. You see a lot of things that are still very, I would say, pertinent to today's day. Like I, will find something where it's talking about the subjugation of women or certain people, and we're still having these conversations today. There's still certain things that we talk about that go on that. Um, Even from a different country, if it comes from a completely different nation, like there's a lot of interesting things. I mean, the one thing that's kind of like obvious, but it's not, I guess, to the forefront of knowledge, would be the fact that uh, we're very similar because we're all human beings. We're very similar people. We just have different backgrounds, cultural identities, religions. But to the meat, when you get down to like the skeleton of who we are, like we act the same. We treated people, terribly, whether we're different colors of skin or anything, or different nations or races. It's it's very fascinating. I mean, of course, white people have had a longer history of subjugation and, you know,
Well, the fact is,
learning.
anything that you can chalk up to government conspiracies, anything, it seems that it's really, really simple and really, really easy for someone to experiment on somebody when they don't look like them. Sadly,
Oh
the
yeah.
fact is, white being a dominant race in America is not becoming the same thing anymore. It's now being a minority race only because of the amount of immigration that comes to this country now. Yeah, if you want to go to our president, say Trump's building a wall or anything like that, it's still not going to stop them from getting here. It's gonna be more
Oh
difficult, but it's always going to happen. Now,
no,
throughout
that's
history,
that's definitely something I've heard. Oh, go ahead.
well,
I
throughout
was just
history,
gonna say, um, I don't mean to keep interrupting you. I was just gonna say that the whole like the wall thing, and most people would agree, other than the base supporters, that it's just a symbol. It's just a literal like here's a symbol of racism right in front of your eyes or right in front of our eyes. Of course, yeah, of course they're gonna come over. I mean, that's another thing. Immigration's always is another thing gets that gets cycled through.
well, throughout history, you can tell by anything, really, just by any of our past knowledge and any past things we've done that have been known as major fuck ups, was the fact that we are afraid of what's different. We're afraid of something new. We don't like something that looks different from beside us. Is the whole fact, like Indians, all these people that were known as tribes, they were like minded individuals that looked alike that stayed together. Okay. Now,
Right.
I don't know where your fascination lies, if it lies in modern history, is it lies in a little bit of like the civil war type era, or do you fall in the lines of ancient history? Because with my influence on history, I have a fascination for Greek mythology. This is
Um, I definitely have a fascination for, I mean, history as a whole because I like to see how people have progressed. Because I mean, when you actually look at it, we haven't changed in the last 500,000 years. The only thing that's changed is technology. We
and the
still
earth.
act the same. Back in the Colosseum, ancient Rome times, they still sold little like wooden figurines of the gladiators that would essentially be action figures today, or something like that. Like buying like a Thor action figure or something like that. It would be a very similar or comparable analogy to, or at least not really analogy, like literal, like what they did um, compared to today's day. We still act the same, and that's very fascinating. I have noticed though, a lot of my research has been falling into like 18th to 19th century, so it's like just at industrialization or modernization, and which is, I mean, very much effective of most of our lives today because a lot of it is you, a lot of it is technology that is just starting, and it's kind of similar and comparable to nowadays because we have the internet and it's a very early instrument, just like industrialization was. And so it's a generation of people trying to adjust to brand new norms and a brand new technology, and we haven't quite figured it out yet. Just like they haven't quite figured it out. That's why there was always, there's the monopolies like with the Rockefeller and Carnegie and all that, is because policy hasn't quite figured out the industry. And the same with with internet is kind of how it's going. That's like when we see Amazon like buying up trucks, and basically from what you look at it, they killed the book industry originally because they just sold books when Amazon first
Barnes and
entered
Nobles
the
used to
internet.
be a thing. Not
Yeah.
anymore. Same thing. Blockbuster. Once Netflix and all that stuff was getting super super popular, it was easier to get the convenience of watching a movie at home without having to go to the store and interact with the weird guy behind the counter that's trying to sell you some movie like Benchwarmers or something. It goes
Of
well. It goes into many aspects when you look at history. First of all, when history, like I took an ancient history course in college, and I actually found most of my, I guess, fondness for it kind of awakened there. I took Greek mythology in my middle school years, and then once I got to college, I got introduced to one of these ancient history classes called Art in Ancient History. Now, this teacher reminded me exactly of Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory.
oh
His
yeah,
mind was all over the place. He would incorporate it in a fun way. Well, have you ever heard of the Venus of Willendorf?
I can't say I have. No.
Well, it's this statue. If you look it up, if you ever seen the movie Hellboy, it's
That is unfortunately one of the movies I have yet to see. The old one with Kelsey Grammer, or is it Kelsey Grammer?
it's
I
Ron
don't know.
Perlman.
But
Well,
is that the older one, or is it
yeah,
the new?
Ron Perlman in the
Oh.
old one. You've never seen the old ones?
No, I've seen bits and pieces, but I haven't actually got to sit down and enjoy the movie.
Well, you're you're missing out. But hold on. The Venus of Willendorf is actually this giant it's actually a really small statue, but they made it giant life in the movie. It has a really big ass and really big boobs, and it's a big woman. It's supposed to represent fertility. What we thought it was a praying statue. You would give it to someone who was not having a kid or wanted to have a kid, and it would bring on the blessings and give them a child. But actually, it turned out it was completely different. It turns out it wasn't anything of that sort. It was actually a child's toy, much like you were saying in the Roman Colosseum, they had dolls and antiques and these types of things. So archaeologists got that wrong. You know what I mean? There's things throughout history we just make a conclusion on a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean then it's just picking up the pieces and trying to figure out certain things. I mean, archaeology is very very fascinating by that fact, where it's people trying to solve a puzzle and there's no what would you say, the box with the picture on it. So they have to, same with paleontology. I think I heard that. I almost feel like that was in one of the Jurassic Park movies, or at least the books or something like that.
I always said if I could explore the Vatican secret archives, the one thing I would really want to find out is I want to get the evidence of the trials for Galileo in 1605. They had a bunch of weird stuff in the Vatican archives. You could look up some type of Illuminati type things, some stuff about the JFK assassination.
Oh, really?
There's so many weird things down in there. And right now they're transcribing, I think each year they transcribe 8.6 million documents over to a flash drive to be backed up because they don't want the Great Fire of Alexandria to happen.
Right.
And I'm hearing all the stuff that is in there, like just a few things. And the trials for Galileo, the guy that literally went against the church, saying that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, that we actually all revolved around the sun.
Right.
They locked him on house arrest. They wouldn't. They used to cut off supplies for his food. People that were supposed to drop him off, they would go and find these people. They would stop them, pay them off, and if they wouldn't be paid off, they would beat them up or kill them. And just so this guy would literally starve inside of his house. He was locked down by the church because he was outspoken against the church. And it's you hear stuff like that, and that makes you definitely want to dive into a little bit more on the world of history. I mean, throughout that this art history class I took really did a very good job, because at the time I was studying psychology, so we could use art analysis to kind of see what the artist's interpretation was. But it's throughout like anything. I play Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Let me tell you something. That's the one Assassin's Creed is my all-time favorite. I played the whole series. The only fascination I have with it is because they bring gods. It's the Spartan times, the era of bronze, all this type of stuff. I was ready for that because I was rarely taught anything about it in school. Not that I
Right.
didn't have an option for a class, but there really wasn't a Greek mythology class. It was seen as like maybe 6 kids in that class. And I'm like, I wanted something that we can focus on. And we did it in a very brief time in history. A lot about history classes I don't like is it focus too much is on modern day history, because they want us to be able to predict what's going to happen in 10 years when we're actually running and we're living in the country.
Right. My experience with history class has always been they start with like at least, I mean, the recent with would be like the American Revolution, and then moving on through that all the way through the Civil War. Very rarely have I gotten past like the 40s, 1940s, or if we even made it that far in history class, because I mean, one, there's just so much they have to put in, and then with the way schools are taught now, I mean, I don't know anything about how the Common Core teachings are with history, or but I do understand that there is this pressure on kids to take tests, and it's just, I don't like the fact that they're just be like, all right, well, you have to learn this because it's on a test, instead of teaching kids about, or at least even if it's young adults, like just teaching them to find a fascination or enthusiasm. Not everyone's going to love history, not everyone's going to enjoy it, because it's not going to be what they're looking for in life. But there are some people who have a slight, like I've talked to coworkers that are just like, oh, I mean, that's pretty interesting, but I mean, it's mostly they would say that it's coaches or something like that.
Well,
I
it's
remember.
it's very difficult when you start getting a lot of information, at least like how you're doing, where you're doing your own research, you're reading books, because if it's not popular trending right now, it's not something a kid's going to come across and see. It's not something a person's going to come across and see. So you start having conversations with people, and then they just start going like, like they say something and it just triggers in your mind like, oh, hey, did you know this was actually something? I actually used to do a spinoff of this podcast called Fill in the Blank, where we focused on specific topics. My buddy was like, I want to know about the Industrial Revolution. I was like, what? Like, you want a topic on the Industrial Revolution? So I'm sitting there scratching my head, and the first thing I do is I go onto Wikipedia. Yep, I go all my sources to Wikipedia. Found out a thing about the Luddites. You know what the Luddites were? They were these people, just like the modern day people now, what we're experiencing, where technology's taken over the job industry. That's
Right.
what Luddites were. What happened was, during the Industrial Revolution, you got maybe a slice of bread, probably is going to last your whole family a week. So you were already scraping through as it was, probably making a nickel literally on the dime. And these people were scraping for everything they had. And then these machines came in, printing press, other types of machines run by these that would create so much smog, oil, whatever you want to say. And
Right.
they were taking their jobs. So it's like a group of farmers felt like they had to be defensive and had to take action. They all grouped up and they would break these machines in the middle of the night. They would break into the factories that they used to work in where they were getting laid off, and they would destroy them. They were known as the Luddites. I researched that from him. There's a good podcast out there I think you'd be fascinated with. It's called Hardcore History. There's too much information, to be 100% honest with you. But the fact is, they're giving you one-sided things. Have you ever looked
Oh,
up,
of course.
well, have you ever looked up inside Russia's history at all?
Not not recent, not really. I know a little bit. I've listened. One of my favorite podcasts did a series on. Oh, I'm blanking on his name right now. Uh,
It's not Dan Carlin, is it?
huh?
It's not Dan Carlin, is it?
No, 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 no. Um, no, the podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of Last Podcast on the Left. Um, if you like conspiracies and true crime kind of stuff, they're really great. I would definitely check them out. But oh, I can't even remember his name. He had so much myths and tall tales around him. He was around the Tsar Nicholas with um, he was the last czar in Russia before the Soviet. I guess the Soviet during World War II. Gosh, can't remember his name, and I'm
Well, I think
beating myself
like
up.
one
But
thing.
that's really the only Russian information I have.
Well, one thing in particular I found fascinating was the fact that there was a band, or there was a group of women known as night witches during the World War II. I don't know if you ever know what the night witches were, but there's these group of women that used to fly in crop dusting airplanes. So you know how the airplane was opened? It wasn't really meant for much but just doing crop work. Well,
Right.
they hooked bombs to them. These women would fly in the middle of night during winter in Russia in these open planes, and they would drop bombs on the Nazis. They
Oh
were
wow.
called night witches because the sound of them at night made it sound like a witch's broom. And these women literally stepped up. They were ripping off bed sheets and stuffing them into their socks, like stuffing them in their boots, because their attire was literally not fit for them. It was men attire. They didn't have combat
Oh
uniforms for women. So
yeah,
these
that's. Oh,
it's
go ahead.
it's like Rosie the Riveter. These women stepped up, and you hear that, I'm like, that's better. Why don't I know about this? And that's because it's
Oh
part of
yeah,
Russia's history.
and I mean, not only that is just like that's another thing is with you know we only hear a fraction of like some of the women who've done a lot of great things, and that's what I'm trying to look for. I don't like actively seek out certain topics. It's more of like browsing the book stands or whatever uh, at whatever bookstore or just anything, and just seeing a title that catches my eye. Like I might have an idea when I walk into the store of something I'd like to look up. Like I wanted to learn more about the Opium Wars because I know just a fraction of that. Like I understand that it was between China and Britain, but I don't really understand the intricate details that would make it interesting. Ended up walking out with a book about the Boxer Rebellion because it seemed more interesting about the state of how led to China's now and the group of people who rose up and fought against the Western settlements in China. So I can't wait to read that book and see what comes out of that.
You remind me of one of my buddies that was on my podcast, John Bunk, in so many ways, because he travels all these places, Jordan, Greece, all these places, just with like he works at a skate park, and then 2 weeks later he just spends that paycheck straight up going to another place. He's like
Wow.
he just does all these weird things. He skateboards over there. He teaches the kids how to skate. That's his thing. But I'm like, hey, you want to come over? He's like, no, I'm gone. I'm like, I'm in Jordan right now. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, dude. And then he'll be like, another time he sent a picture of himself on the pyramids. I'm like, dude, I just saw you like not even 3 days ago. And he's like, yeah, I'm in Egypt now. I'm like, okay. All right, well, don't get killed or anything. But he had a fascination with the Opium Wars. It was started with the Hun dynasty. It was one of the dynasties, but it was meant to be like energy, like an energy type thing. They wanted to do a form of like caffeine, kind of like how coffee it wakes you up. They thought that would help create better warriors, help you able to focus. And the problem was their army got addicted to it. They
Yeah.
were getting, they were also they were trading it from somewhere. I can't remember where exactly it was from, but it was a battle between the British as well. And the fact was that one of the emperors literally had to cut it off from their country. It was like, no, we can't have this in our army because it's making lazy soldiers. They were literally not training anymore. They were just getting obsessed with the drug. It's literally where you saw the start of like a massive addiction. And I started hearing that stuff. I think the main thing people need to keep into mind is when you look at things throughout history, like Christopher Columbus, things you can't do, like oh, I can't be Christopher Columbus. I'm not smart like him. He wasn't fucking smart either.
No, I was about to start laughing at you on that one, but yeah, I mean, he was smart to a degree, but yeah, that's definitely one of the main issues. When people told him he couldn't do it or wouldn't give him the funding was because his math was way off. Like he sized the circumference of the Earth way too small,
Yeah.
and
I
you
think
know,
you start when you start looking at people throughout history and you start seeing like the real side of it. I think the one thing you have to keep in mind is anything that you're given information wise, remember that that person is a person and people make mistakes. And
oh,
people
yeah.
usually try and glamour up the story. I mean, how many times do you say, like, let's use a gym reference since we're guys, oh, I benched 200 pounds. You probably benched 175, but you're adding some weight onto that one. And same thing with women. How much do you weigh? And then they say, oh, I'm this age. And then it turns out you just add 5 years. It can brought up the same thing. People tend to blurred out the real truth. They want to kind of give you a little bit of false information, kind of glamour it up a little bit. So if you keep that in mind when you're looking at history topics, you understand when you do read a real one, with like the real facts behind it, it doesn't have that much of an impact to you to the point where you're cutting off your TV and your cable.
Right. No, but you're absolutely right on that one with people embellishing, and then it's also like that game, I'm sure you're aware of, Telephone, where you tell one person, or I don't know if you ever did it in elementary, but you tell the first person something as a secret, and by the time it reached the end of the class,
The end of the kids. That's called telephone for you? That was always called like
I don't know, that's what I remember it being called, was Telephone. What is it called?
I just called it passing it down, because you're literally telling a story or
Oh.
doing something, and then 50 kids later, that story turns into something ridiculous. You're like, what?
It's also interesting too, because I believe, was it Plato or Aristotle? I can't remember. My brain's hurting right now on that. But one of those two, I really think it's Plato, but one of those people talked about how writing down changed our memory.
Oh, that's Aristotle.
Okay, that was Aristotle.
He was the one that invented all the things we have, like comedy, tragedy, all the playwrights. A lot of our literature came from Aristotle, and people looked at him as batshit crazy. I mean, I love ancient Greece so much, like the historians and those philosophers that had such creativity. But I also have a fascination with the Renaissance period. I mean, the fact that Leonardo da Vinci had one of the most famous quotes, at least in my mind, is art is never finished, just left undone. And the reason why was he never sold the Mona Lisa. He never did any of these things. They got it from his house after he died. And he believed that you can constantly add small adjustments to it to make it improve it. So he worked on it for years and he never finished it. He was known to half finish everything, but in his aspect, everything was already unfinished. He had so much he could keep adding throughout the years that he could never finalize on something.
Oh man, I can definitely sympathize with him for sure. Like I like to try to write some stories, but then all of a sudden, or I'm making up stories, but then there's like, okay, well, I can tweak it here, or I can change it here, and I can add to there. And of course, that plays into our fascination with, like, I know I'm kind of taking a 180 turn, but like sequels with movies, and you see all this, like, such and such, and it does seem pretty gets you some kind of fatigue over that. But it's true though, art's unfinished work, and sometimes somebody else also that likes that same art may want to put their spin on it. I see art as in the encompassing of everything, not just write or drawing or painting. With writing and photography. I'm sure I'm sorry, I worked this morning, so my brain is.
I get it, man, dude. Working the server job, it's not an easy life, dude. Trust me. My cousin's a server, and I swear he barely gets any sleep. He's just brewing up a pot of coffee at 2:00 in the morning. I'm like, did you just get home? He's like, yeah, got another shift 9 a.m. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been pulling in a lot of hours this week. So,
well, you should look up a podcast with Joe Rogan he had two guests on, Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Now, they did something known about the water erosion with the Sphinx. I don't know if you know anything about this.
I don't know anything about that, but it sounds like one of those obvious things, but it's also interesting to want to know about how much of erosion. But
they actually found that the Ancient Sphinx is actually older than what we predicted it to be. They actually believe it actually predecesses man. Based on water erosion levels, they know that there hasn't been water in the Nile for 5,000 years, something ridiculous, insanely high number. And they actually started seeing watermarks on the Sphinx. So they're like, there's no way it rained all the way up to the Sphinx's nose where there was a water line. And it made them question, it made them wonder. And it turns out that Sphinx actually predecesses a lot of things, which makes people think, was there a pre-civilization? Now, I don't know if you've ever seen Bill Nye Tackles the World or his new show that just came out. Well,
Uh-uh.
do you know who Bill Nye is? Please tell me you do.
Oh yes, of
Okay.
course. I mean, I'm not completely a shut-in.
Well, Bill Nye actually started another show series. Instead of his old show teaching us all these wonderful things about science, he actually made a video that he posted on Facebook when his show was coming out. And it was the globe. And he goes, here's the globe. Grabs a torch, lights it on fire, and goes, wake the fuck up. I taught you when you were kids. Now you're adults. And then he literally turns it into a way now where he's talking to you like real. He's talking to you like
Right.
he's aged with you in the same concept. He's not treating you like a kid anymore. And I'm sitting there like, oh my God, Bill, you were the science guy. He goes, no, now I'm Bill motherfucking Nye. And he starts in his show, he starts showing all the things about the earth, everything that's going on around it. And he kind of focuses around it, gets different scientists on there, does real funny, like comedic things on there to kind of get your, because you have to bring them in with humor, obviously. And
Right.
he shows all the eras before us, and humankind, like just us, our species is so young compared to the other ones that predecessed before us. The ones like there had to be such an impact, such as the glacial period where, everything froze over. Those animals had to die. The reason why we're not seeing woolly mammoths and all these types of savage animals, and the reason why we had a really good spot too with just accidental discovery on Christopher Columbus's part, but our survival rate based on the animals that live here, is the fact that this area only maintained 80% of its predecessor species when it came to the idea of the ones like the mammoths, the saber-toothed tigers, those things that died off. Those things sometimes the ones that were left over, like you ever see 300 where they're like battling a giant tiger and all that type of shit. Well,
Oh yeah.
those were ancestors of the predecessors of the mammoths and all those types of things. So now if you look into that, America only had 80% that was taken off just because of where we were. Okay. If you want to believe the asteroid, all that types of things, and knocked out the dinosaurs, whatever you want to believe. I have a friend who practices does a podcast on all the ancient stuff throughout history, but he believes we come from Mars. He's not wrong in that aspect. I think I'm open to interpretation, but I'm also open. I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible.
Right.
Because I feel like people are too close-minded. He believes that an asteroid hit Mars or something, and then space dust kind of flew, and then those particles are what we are, but we've evolved in that sense. I understand
Right. That's,
that.
that's I've heard that theory before too, and it's very an interesting one too.
I mean, I can't say that it's wrong because I'm not a scientist in no way. Just so people know out there, if I'm getting facts wrong, I'm just saying, hey, I'm a guy just trying to talk.
I mean, if an asteroid or meteorites from Mars did hit into us, it is a very high possibility that if there was life on Mars first and then it could have gotten transferred over. I mean, that's why NASA is so concerned whenever seeing rovers and everything different, I guess, celestial objects, that it has no bacteria or it's completely cleansed, because they don't want to introduce living organisms to where it might look like we found life somewhere when you were the ones that sent out there or something like that.
I think the
So,
weird
I mean, I see how highly possible it is.
I think the weird thing is that there's people like, oh, there's no meteor that took out the dinosaurs. I think you have to look at Jupiter and see it more as a shield. The fact that Jupiter's gravitational pull, it literally saves us from so many meteors. There was one in 2010, and around October, they caught one that was like 3 times the size of the meteor that basically killed off the dinosaurs, and it was going to hit us, and it's going to cause some damage, but the fact was it just missed us only because of the fact that Jupiter's gravitational pull pulled it away from us, at least heading towards us. Now if you look
My
at
only thing, my only thing about with the meteor, I mean, there's evidence for it on Earth with like craters, and then like what in the Yucatan Peninsula, that whole area is supposed to have been like an impact crater, as what they theorize. I don't fully believe that it was only just a like a meteor that hit and caused like the sky to blacking out, but it could have been part of a chain reaction of, or at least the beginning of a chain reaction of certain things that led to one, and it didn't complete, and it caused like a mass extinction, but there were still other animals that had survived. But at the same time, I mean, I'm no expert on that, so I'm not going to. I have no idea what the. I don't know.
I think it's really fascinating to see, I guess, development of the earth, but at the same time, development of people, like the tools and types of things we have to be kind of find our own path on what we have to work with. Like they found that one cave. I think it was called the inside of the. It's called the Cave of the Forgotten Dreams, but it had a more specific name to it. I can't think of. But there was cave paintings inside of it, like long before we even thought like humans were around. And that brings up to the concept of like apes, were they painting things on walls? Were they doing types of things of this sort? I mean, before we had candles, we were using animal fat, and we were using like types of fur and types of things of this sort to create wickers and be able to create lights to do paintings inside caves, where there was a place that was dark, we made light. And you hear stuff like that. You hear them hunting animals. The weird thing was they talked about this cave having these symbolistic drawings inside, much like hieroglyphics, like stick figures, animals, all these types of things where it seemed like someone was creating art. And they wondered why it was like faded a little bit. And they realized that it was from a movie. It was like watching a movie. What happened is they lit a candle in this cave, much like they would have back then using animal fat and some type of fire substance. They would watch as it would flicker, just like our candle flickers constantly. The light doesn't stay like 100% the whole time. And it was like watching a movie. These pictures and these depictions on the wall that they thought was them recording their history was actually like a movie. It was literally these figures would move with the shadows because of the candle.
Like
They were like, it was
like an optical illusion and everything.
yeah, but it
Right?
was like it was a
Okay.
form of entertainment. So that made up to the concept of they were creating things to keep themselves occupied as well, like a form of laughter, a form of like watching a movie. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
what really brings into the concept like there's so many things, I guess, that's so unexplained. It's hard to give it sufficient evidence. Like, when you watch CSI and they're like, this house burned down. Like, how did it burn down? A guy just goes, this match. That one match, this match. Like, you can't do that. There could be so many.
Well, yeah, that's definitely, of course, fantastical on TV. But there are like amazing men and women that are in a profession that can find a source of a fire because I mean they study that kind of stuff. They understand how fires work, and of course, I mean I'm sure they do controlled fires so they can find out what it would look like if it came from like a light socket or if somebody's poured down kerosene or gasoline and how what it would look like on what the burning remains would look like on certain structures. So, I definitely those people I can't ever compare to my with them.
Well,
But
sadly,
like
you're looking at the intent of good people. I'm talking
yeah,
about the ones that usually get the pass and usually get the glory. So a lot of those times, those people took a little bit of a shady route to get there. Now, I'm not saying all people are bad. I believe all people are good, but most
oh
of
yeah,
the time, people choose the easiest option and the easiest answer. There was this one guy I always kind of use as an example. He literally was doing a murder case. It was a cop, but he was working in this case about trying to convict this guy who killed his mother. And the guy was like, I didn't do it. I did not kill my mom. Even his dad's like, there's no way he's a killer. It didn't happen. Well, the guy ended up falsifying a lot of evidence and then got the guy convicted for 20 years. And then while he's in this place for 20 years, he's like, they won't let him go because he's not showing any remorse, which shows I guess, a capability of being psychotic, being mentally ill, that he wasn't showing remorse for killing his mom. But he was literally like, I didn't kill my mom. Like, it didn't happen. And this cop, after all these years of this guy in prison, was like, I found more evidence on the case. And they're like, what? Like, what do you mean? Because this guy's trial kept coming up, where you get like parole and all that, and he kept getting it
right.
denied. Well, he's like, I found more evidence. This is evidence that he killed his mom. 100% sure now. Keep him away for all the amount of time he's supposed to be in there for. And they were like, okay, where'd you find your evidence? He goes, he hid money. It was a money scam. He killed his mom for insurance money and he hid it inside the house. I went to the house. I looked for it and found all this stuff. Well, there were people living in the house he was talking about. They asked the people, did this guy come by and look inside the house for any type of treasure or money that may have been hidden? And they all said no. Turned out the cop was a liar. He got disbanded from the force, and they released the guy from jail. The factor is there are people out there that choose the easiest route, choose the easiest answer to things. And a lot of times you can see that throughout our history. A lot of people, scientists, archaeologists, whether you want to do, it seems like a lot of their information and stuff comes right at the end of when their program's about to be shut down. Like an archaeologist going, I just found this bone from the Australopithecus, whatever you want to call it. And it's like, we just told you yesterday your government funding was going to be cut, so you weren't going to be able to do your dig sites anymore. Now you're telling me you just found a bone after 30 years. Well, it took time, but luckily, it's like, it's like we're given a little bit of a scam.
I mean, my first inclination is usually to, is over trusting. But yeah, I've definitely seen it. People do like to take the easiest route. I mean, nobody wants to do something that's hard. That's why certain things like, working out, going to the gym and stuff like that, for a very, very oversimplified example. But the reason a lot of us don't do it is because it's hard work.
I guess I think a lot of what can be kind of discovered or determined really bases on the person's, I guess, moral justification on what is really right. If I was doing something that's so reliable on trying to understand our history, I want to know the good shit and the bad shit. I definitely think at the same time, I would like to teach more people to be open to the bad stuff. A lot of times people don't want to know the bads, but with everything that's happened throughout history, all the fascination, the folklore, anything you want to look at, you got to look at, there is a hint of truth to what they're talking about. Don't just chalk up anything to being, out of the realm of possibility. There's no God like men. No, but maybe they were so powerful that they seemed like gods. You know what I mean? That they were not saying they had super strong Hercules strength where they could punch somebody through a wall and like knock down buildings, but there was a guy that was strong compared to everyone else. It's over, I guess, exaggerating things. You have to look at, when is that right and when is that wrong? When you're creating folklore or a type of hero for people to kind of structure themselves by, sure. But when you're trying to do correct evidence on where the earth came from and then bring up the theory of the flat earth, we got to start trying to focus in on a little bit more of who we are as people before we can start diving into the realms of possibilities of other beings out there in space. Well, I think, man, it's been good talking to you about like types of history stuff. I'm actually excited to, I hope you keep kind of creating more content. It's probably got to be difficult on the fact that you don't really have a whole lot of internet and things of this sort, but it's pretty cool how you do your show, just because on the basis of, there are some history podcasts out there, but they don't really, I would say there's not enough, you know what I mean? There's not a giant a selection of those, mostly because nobody wants to sit and read a book and then start talking about it. And plus, when it comes to history, it seems like a lot of people are like, oh, well, if I wanted to hear history, I would just watch a history class. I'm like, no, the idea and objective of it when you create a podcast is to make it fun. And it's something you're doing. I was listening to the Flat Earth one, and then I was listening to one of your second episodes on your SoundCloud. You definitely want to put a little bit more of like a link to your Facebook. I couldn't find it, but just more information on stuff like that. Like when you send me it, I'll post it up into the ending of this podcast so we can make sure we get all that in there for you. Because I want you to keep creating this amazing content, dude. I love that you have a fascination for history, man. That's awesome. I definitely think you should end up being a history teacher, if anything.
Yeah, no, I definitely, my coworkers thought the same thing. But with, God, I'm getting so sidetracked in my brain. With what you were saying with like creating content, like I definitely wanted to make sure it was a interesting stuff. If I find it interesting, I know, and I don't know anything about it, or if I don't know much about it, somebody else out there doesn't know that either. So that's the rationale I'm giving. I'm not, thinking like, oh, well, so many people. I do want to try and avoid like big topics like, Abraham Lincoln, because who doesn't have a special on Abraham Lincoln or has talked about Abraham Lincoln or anything like that?
You got to look at the small. You got to look at the small commodities a lot of people don't know about, like cornflakes. You should do a podcast on cornflakes. You know why?
Right. How
1945 anti-masturbation. Sir Harvey Kellogg invented cornflakes.
I've definitely heard that. Like that's
you hear stuff like that, that'll make you listen to a podcast. I'm sitting there. I did a podcast on it. I was just eating Raisin Bran. And my buddy's like, you feel like masturbating yet? I'm like, not at all. Not at all.
Well, that's because it's got raisins in it.
Yeah,
You
not
had
the
to-
cornflakes.
You had to do the plain old cornflakes. Can't do any of that 2 scoops of raisin. That's what's gonna kill the
2
mood.
scoops of raisins. That son's been lying to me. Well, hey, man, it was awesome having you on the podcast. And people out there, look up Garrett's content. It's great. And stay tuned for the next episode.